It is estimated that in any given population, 3% of these people are considered to be sociopaths or psychopaths. In other words, capable of becoming serial killers. People who can find serial murder to be satisfying. How many serial killers are operating at any one time is not known exactly. But in the United States, experts believe there are over 500 active serial killers perpetrating evil on innocent victims. As a result, serial killers through the media, in books, movies,
people were shocked, they were awed, and they couldn't turn away.
Newspaper articles, the evening news.
He's allegedly confessed to dozens of murders from 1970 to 2005 in at least a dozen states.
And now on giant streaming platforms. Serial killers have become bigger than ever, bigger than life. Such portrayals include Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, 2019, a biographical portrayal of Ted Bundy. The 2022 The Good Nurse, the story of one of the most prolific serial killing healthcare workers, Charles Cullen. My Friend Dahmer, 2017, a biographical drama film about Jeffrey Dahmer. The Night Stalker, The Hunt for a Serial Killer, 2021, a documentary series delving into the murders perpetrated by Richard Ramirez. BTK, A Killer Among Us, 2019, a documentary that focuses on Dennis Rader. The Green River Killer, 2005, a feature film that explores the case of Gary Ridgway, one of the most prolific serial killers in United States history. The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness, 2021, the story of David Berkowitz. But the flow of information goes the other way as well. There are 27 different ways in which serial killers communicate before, during, and after their murders. Of course, Jack the Ripper started it all when he wrote letters to the London police.
I send you half the kidney I took from one woman and preserved it for you. T'other piece, I fried and ate it. Was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you only wait a while longer.
Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, left gruesome symbols at his crime scenes. The recently captured Gilgo Beach serial killer, Rex Heuermann, who tormented the family of one of his murder victims.
Do you think you will ever see her again? You won't. I killed her.
The unknown Zodiac serial killer sent letters to the press that started, "This is the Zodiac speaking."
I will be reborn in paradise, and all those I have killed will be my slaves. I will not give you my name because you'll try to slow or stop my collecting slaves for my afterlife.
Dennis Rader, also known as BTK, murdered 10 people in Wichita, Kansas, between the years 1974 and 1991. And he might have gotten away with his brutal killings if his psychopathic nature hadn't longed for attention. Attention he got by taunting the police, letting law enforcement know he was smarter than them. Rader wrote,
"I did it myself, with no one's help. Let's put it straight."
Rader went on to provide graphic details that only someone at the crime scene would know. Then there is a little-known killer of 8 women, Keith Jesperson, the happy face killer. Jesperson wrote confessions on the wall of a truck stop he was passing through and signed the confession with a hand-drawn happy face.
I beat her to death and loved it. Yes, I'm sick, but I enjoyed myself too. 2 people took the blame and I'm free.
In this series, we will look at the many bizarre cases of the way serial killers are driven to communicate their psychopathic need to let the world know how powerful they were. How powerful they were because they can control the life and death of another human being. How powerful they are because they can terrify whole communities. Police estimate that Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler, may have raped as many as 300 women. Soon, sadistic sex was not enough. Starting on June 14, 1962, for nearly 2 years, DeSalvo killed freely, murdering 13 women and terrorizing Boston. Not only terrorizing Boston, Albert DeSalvo was the model for using all forms of psychopathic communication during his reign of terror. Psychopathic communication to show how powerful he was. What are the characteristics of a psychopathic person?
Someone who is diagnosed as a psychopath is typically someone who is not troubled by the murder, or at least on the face of it, doesn't appear to be troubled by the murder.
They see people as objects. They see people as ways to meet their own ends, whether they're going to kill them, whether they're going to climb beyond them to a higher step in industry.
DeSalvo was a classic case of a psychopath.
Between 1962 and 1964, for a period of about 1.5 years, the Boston Strangler terrorized the women of Boston. During that period of time, women just didn't go out on the streets alone. Not after dark. They were always in a group because they were scared to death. Who would be the next victim?
DeSalvo also corresponded with the media, sending letters in which he claimed responsibility for the Boston Strangler murders. These letters were widely publicized and contributed to the fear and fascination surrounding the case. One notable instance of communication with the media occurred on December 5, 1962, when a woman named Sophie Clark was found dead and a note was discovered at the crime scene. The note contained a message written in Latin, which was later translated to,
"I will do it again."
DeSalvo was also known to have made phone calls to some of the victims' families, further terrorizing them. These calls were often disturbing and traumatic for the families involved. Finally, DeSalvo left behind a grotesque, ritualized crime scene, as if taunting the people who would witness it. Female bodies were left in suggestive positions. Nylon stockings, or other items of their personal apparel, had been knotted around their necks. Some had bottles, broomsticks, or other foreign objects jutting out of their bodies. Propped up against the foot of the final victim, strangled on January 4, 1964, stood a cheery greeting card that read,
"Happy New Year!"
Albert DeSalvo continued to kill, and the public outcry became greater and greater and greater. It's a testament to 2 things. Number one, his ability to be ingratiating to people obviously was so strong that even after there was a known killer who killed people in their homes, he was able to continue to get into women's homes by talking his way in. That's kind of an amazing thing to think about. And also, as that public outcry became greater and greater, the posing of the victims and the tableau that he left behind was clearly designed to create more hoopla, to create more attention. It's obvious that he enjoyed not only the acts he was committing, but the public response.
By January 1964, 13 women were dead, but the terror was over. Oddly, on January 18, 1967, Albert DeSalvo, the notorious Boston Strangler, was sentenced to life in prison, not for murder, but for rape. However, in 2013, DNA testing left no doubt that DeSalvo, the bold psychopathic serial killer, had and murdered Mary Sullivan. This serial killer was even described by one witness as the boogeyman. He was the predator of children, the devourer of human flesh, the werewolf of Wisteria, the Brooklyn vampire, a perverted, psychopathic, the first and best well-known case of a serial killer who tormented the family of one of his victims. This boogeyman turned out to be Albert Fish, who looked remarkably like your own grandfather. Born May 19, 1870 in Washington, D.C., Fish's father died when he was young, and he was placed in an orphanage. Here, he suffered and witnessed merciless beatings. He found that he enjoyed watching other boys being whipped, and that he liked being whipped himself. His dark side was beginning to emerge. Then, Fish moved to New York City when he was 24. But it wasn't until he was 47 that he turned his predatory attention to children. In 1917, his wife Anna ran off with another man, leaving him alone to provide for their 6 children. Fish settled permanently in New York City. There, he developed a desire for the bodies and souls of innocent children. He began to work at homes for mentally challenged children. Fish confessed that he liked to kill the disabled and black boys because nobody would miss them. Then, on February 11, 1927, he performed his most gruesome murder yet. A boy named Billy Gaffney was snatched through a skylight while playing in an apartment building hallway. A boy who saw the abduction told authorities the boogeyman took him. Fish confessed to Billy's mother that he mutilated, dismembered him, drained and drank his blood, and the rest of his body saved for food. He put Billy's ears, nose, face, and belly in a stew with onions and carrots. His genitals and behind were roasted in the oven. In the end, there was nothing left. Fish claimed the innocent life of a child once more. On June 3, 1928, here at this cottage, Fish performed the most infamous atrocity ever to take place on American soil: the murder of Grace Budd.
When Albert Fish initially contacted that family, he was responding to an ad they'd placed in the paper for employment for their son. And I believe that it was his son that was his initial interest. But when he went to the house and he met the girl, he changed his game. He changed his intended victim to the girl. And again, it may be because she was so young, so meek, and so able to be dominated by him very easily.
And dominated she was. Like poor Billy Gaffney, she was killed, cooked, and eaten. Then came that horrific letter to Grace's mother.
On Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her, on the pretense of taking her to a party. You said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook, and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. She died a virgin.
However, this letter was ultimately Fish's downfall. When Fish sent the letter, he had attempted to cross out a letterhead typed on an envelope he had found. Police were able to trace the address back to Fish's room in a nearby boarding house, where he was arrested on December 13, 1934. Later, Fish confessed to killing 5 children, including Billy Gaffney and Grace Budd. On January 16, 1936, Fish was electrocuted at Sing Sing Prison. But his psychopathic need to torture the families of his victims has been carried forward into the late 20th and early 21st centuries. For the first 2 decades of the 21st century, the sands and marshes of Long Island's Gilgo Beach was the dumping grounds for victims of a psychopathic serial killer. A serial killer who used Craigslist to lure sex workers to his home and brutally murdered them, and then mutilated their bodies. 7 bodies remained hidden for months and even years until discovered in 2010 along Gilgo Beach. After the bodies were found, members of the Suffolk community were in a state of terror. But the case went cold, and no suspects were named. Then, in July 2013, 59-year-old New York City architect Rex Heuermann was charged with the murders of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, and was also the prime suspect in the murder of a 4th woman, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, who was last seen alive in New York City in early June 2007. These women became known as the Gilgo 4.
He solicited them for prostitution. So his main goal in contacting the victims was to get them in the same room as him and then begin his reign of terror.
Turns out that Rex Heuermann is one of the worst psychopathic serial killers of all time.
2 different people referred to Rex Heuermann as an ogre. One of them talked about him being an ogre when he actually solicited sex from one of the later victims and was denied and actually swindled out of his money. And later, when the witness was interviewed, she recalled that the man was heavyset in his 40s and ogreish. Interestingly enough, that same terminology was used by an associate of Heuermann's in downtown New York City. The architect was actually referred to as an ogre by one of the female coworkers.
Worst of all, Heuermann was a serial killer who used communication to torment his victims and their families before, during, and after his evil acts.
It was found that he had not only solicited the victims and called them repeatedly in the lead up to the killings, but afterwards he actually searched the crimes and looked at the police progress as it pertained to updates on the case. And so the killer, Heuermann, used Google to keep tabs on the investigation and utilized the internet to feel a sense of power over not only his victims, but the entire public at large.
For example, Rex Heuermann in 2009, using Melissa Barthelemmy's cell phone, made taunting calls to her 15-year-old sister and claimed he killed Barthelemy.
Do you think you will ever see her again? You won't. I killed her.
He added and hung up. It was the first of 7 calls he made from Barthelemmy's cell phone. In the final call, Heuermann continued.
He went into gruesome detail about how he assaulted and killed her, and those specific words have not been released to the public, rightly so, but of course Melissa's 15-year-old sister is now going to carry that around with her for the rest of her life, which ultimately achieves what Heuermann sought out, which is being almost living rent-free in not only the victims' minds, but also in that of their family.
Perhaps no urban interstate highway system is better known than the I-95 corridor around America's capital, Washington, D.C. Known for its traffic congestion, but in the early 70s also known as the killing field for an elusive and cruel serial killer. A serial killer known by the name the Freeway Phantom.
Well, the Freeway Phantom got its name from a local reporter who dubbed it that because the way this killer operated was to deposit his victims primarily at the start along I-295, and then he kind of branched off and off roads off of 295, which is a major highway running north and south through Washington, D.C.
From April 1971 through December 1972, a brazen psychopathic child serial killer took the lives of 6 African-American girls. Girls that ranged from 10 years old to 18 years old. The Freeway Phantom, like most psychopathic serial killers, believed he was invincible. He called the family of a victim and left a note taunting the police.
Almost all of them, until the later ones, were abducted during daylight hours. So however his method of getting them into the vehicle, it's in some way doing it without raising attention from people on the streets or sidewalks or in nearby buildings. He takes all of the victims from their neighborhood to an undisclosed location, which we assume is his house, because he does place phone calls from there. So it's not an abandoned building or something where he's taking them. It's got to be someplace where there's a phone, because we know he allowed one of the victims to call. He sexually assaults them in that location. They pick up these green nylon fibers, their clothing does. He has killed them, and then he redresses them. He deposits all of his victims on major roadways.
A pattern that began with his very first victim.
The first victim was 13-year-old Carol Denise Spinks. She disappeared on April 25th, 1971. She was found several days later. She was found on I-295, about 200 yards from the Suitland Parkway. She had been strangled and sexually assaulted. What's really interesting and fascinating about this is, of all the victims, she was kept alive for 3 days by her killer. She was kidnapped, and they found contents in her stomach that hadn't been fully digested. And she had been found on April 30th. She had been kept alive for at least 3 days by her killer before he killed her.
The second victim was 16-year-old Denise Johnson.
She was found, and it's a disturbing situation because she was disappeared on July 8th, 1971, but she wasn't found until July 19th. Now, I'm going to clarify that a little bit. She was found. People driving on I-295 actually called in on multiple occasions and said there's a dead girl laying alongside the highway. Police would go out. They didn't get out of their cars. They just drove along the road looking and didn't see her. Finally, it was a neighbor of one of the officers who worked in the department said, for days I've been driving by this dead girl on the highway. Are you going to go pick her up? And he was like, show me where it is. She had been out there decomposing for days, but they couldn't actually tell anything about how she died. But what's really interesting is she was found 15 feet from where the first victim was found.
Then a body was discovered on Route 50 in Prince George's County, Maryland.
The next victim was on July 27th, 1971, Brenda Faye Crockett, the youngest of the victims. She's 10 years old.
While in captivity, this young victim was forced to call her family.
Now, what's interesting about this, the house where they lived received a phone call from Brenda. And it was picked up initially by her 9-year-old sister. She said that there was a man outside. They could hear movement of someone walking on a wooden floor. She phoned the house 2 more times that night, and audibly crying. And she said that a white man had picked her up and taken her to Virginia, and that he would be sending her home. And she asked one of the people she spoke to, the boyfriend of her mother, did Mama see me? In other words, did Mama see me? Which indicates that she must have seen her mother out looking for her at the time she was apprehended by the killer. And the killer deliberately left clues by telling her it's a white man, tell her we've taking you to Virginia. He had literally had her seed clues that might throw the police off if they were looking for him. She was found. She had been strangled, they believe, with a scarf that was around her neck, and had been sexually assaulted.
The Freeway Phantom struck again, this time grabbing Nino Moshia Yates.
Her body was found by a hitchhiker on Pennsylvania Avenue, just beyond the district line. So the killer has started now, with the last 2 victims, moving some of the bodies into other jurisdictions, primarily Prince George's County. Her body was still warm when it was found. It was only 3 hours from when she disappeared and only 5 miles away. The grass around her body was wet, and there had been a recent rain, so they were really able to narrow down how she had, when she had perished. Cause of death was strangulation again. She had fingernail marks on her neck.
The case of the Phantom's next victim is particularly disturbing because the perpetrator left a note.
You end up moving into November of 15th of 1971, and it's Brenda Denise Woodard. She's 18 years old. So you've got a 10-year-old at one end of the spectrum, and this is the oldest of the victims, who's 18. What's fascinating about her is her school books were missing, so the killer must have kept those. And also what was found in her pocket was a note. The killer had actually had her write a note and had placed that note in her pocket. Now the handwriting's in her handwriting. And the note was a big reveal, I think, for a lot of people, because it was the first time that the killer actually spoke to law enforcement. And the note read, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can. and it was signed the Freeway Phantom. And it's signed Free-Way Phantom. So it's a real unique split on the name. But it was written in her handwriting, and the analysis from the FBI indicated that it wasn't done under duress. And the words were not words that she was familiar with. She didn't use words like insensitivity and tantamount. So the belief is one of two scenarios, that the killer dictated the message to her and she wrote it down, because there is two misspellings in it, or it was handwritten out by the killer in advance and she was told to copy it. However, by the time she got that done, she had to know that she was going to be killed. She knew who the Freeway Phantom was. She had warned her sisters about it. So clearly she fought back against her killer. He stabbed her and then dumped her body out literally on the curve right there, going out of where the road merges. And that brings us to the final of the victims. Diane Denise Williams, 17 years old. She disappears much later. It's September 5th, 1972, when she's disappears. We've just crossed the 50th anniversary of that. What's interesting is there's a big gap of time. It's 10 months has passed since the Freeway Phantom is struck.
The last we hear from the Phantom Freeway serial killer is a call to Williams' parents when he told them,
"I killed your daughter."
Suddenly, the terror ended. The Phantom Freeway killer, the evil murderer of 6 beautiful and innocent young girls, has never been caught. But his egotistical, manipulative nature confirms a psychopathic personality that relishes in controlling the life and death of others. However, the worst of the psychopathic family tormenting serial killers was Joseph James DeAngelo, best known as the Golden State Killer. He was also known as the East Area and the Visalia Ransacker. He was the perpetrator of at least 13 murders and 50 in California in the 1970s and 80s.
The Golden State Killer is one of the most sadistic serial killers and serial that modern American history has seen. He not only over 30 people, but he would kill the household pets of the victims, and he often would threaten or actually assault the children of the victims. One of those children has never testified publicly, but details of the case say that the East Area actually sodomized him and then went on to assault his mother as well. The East Area built up his crimes. He would stalk the victims, he would go to their houses and leave strange calling cards, be it on the door handles or inside their homes. And he often seemed to gain a sense of power from having complete control over the environment. He may have cased the area multiple times leading up, and he definitely made phone calls to the victims and their neighbors. In some cases, entire neighborhoods were terrorized by these phone calls.
His MO is terrible. He'd ride a bicycle to a house, break in, houses with couples in them. Then he would put a knife at the woman's throat and tell the husband that if he let him tie the husband up, that he'd be fine. Then he tied the husband up and then had him go flat on the ground, face down. Then he'd put dishes on the back of the killer, on the back of the victim, the male, so that if while he was raping the woman, he heard glasses break, ceramic break, he'd know that something was going on. So he would tie the man up, put the dishes on him, rape the woman, then kill them both.
His victims include Claude Snelling, Brian and Katie Majori, Robert Offerman, Alexandria Manning, Lyman and Charlene Smith, Keith and Patricia Harrington, Manuela Whithune, Sherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez, and Janelle Lisa Cruz. Then, D'Angelo disappeared. Born in 1945, D'Angelo was the eldest of 4 children. He joined the U.S. Navy in 1964 and served in the Vietnam War. Discharged, he went to college and graduated with an associate degree in police science. There, he met and got engaged to the love of his life, Bonnie Colwell.
Bonnie was actually his fiance, who he had overpowered and repeatedly throughout their relationship. She was much younger than him. He was a Vietnam vet by the time that he started dating Bonnie. And Bonnie recalls that he actually had trained himself to not fully ejaculate in his sexual interactions so that he could continue the experience for multiple times. And she recalls that that type of painful persistency was something that he seemed to derive pleasure from, even when he knew that it wasn't something that she wanted.
A year after a broken-off engagement to Bonnie, he obtained a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. From 1973 to 1976, he worked in the burglary unit of the Exeter, California Police Department.
What makes the East Area so profoundly dangerous is his unpredictability. There wasn't an exact science to who he chose as his victims, and there wasn't a specific methodology that he utilized. He started out with guns, but soon found that the bullets were far too traceable. He moved on to bludgeoning, but learned that that was messy because bludgeoning begets blood. And so he then moved on to covering the victims' heads with pillowcases or other sheets so that when he bludgeoned them, the blood would be contained. And that shows a level of not only foresight, but also reflectiveness. His position as a cop obviously helped him be aware of how technology and crime scene methodology was changing throughout the years.
But it was the scope of D'Angelo's terrorizing families and whole communities through his communications that makes him the evilest of the psychopathic serial killers.
One time he called a group of 3 women who lived in Walnut Creek near the golf course and told them that they would be next. And unfortunately, when he gave these threats, they often came into fruition. But many times he called and never interacted with the victims again, where there's still people to this day who wonder, did I receive a harassing call from the East Area? Because he didn't just call the people that he intended on killing. He didn't just call those who he wanted to physically interact with. He made sure that his purview of power extended far beyond the house of the victim, often into the neighborhoods or the entire towns. And that ability to use the phone lines to continually harass the victims far before the internet was even something that was thought of conceptually, he found a way to enter into the homes of victims in a very insidious and in a very dark and very menacing way. He inserted himself into the private domiciles of people that he wanted to have power over.
Here is a recording of his heavy breathing from one of his phone calls to a potential victim.
He also would call the sheriff's department. In fact, he one time called the sheriff's department twice before committing the next crime. He called both at 9:50 p.m. and 9:52 p.m. Later that night, he would actually go out and kill. But in making those phone calls, he was almost like a child demanding attention. And this possibly could be a compensation for a lack of attention that he received either as a child or as a young adult. His issues with his mother also come up in some of his interactions with the public. There's one famous video recording of him muttering to himself after he was caught. And he says that he wants to be with his mother. That later is echoed in some of the witness statements where they recall him walking around their home in between the and talking about Bonnie or talking about his mother, about saying how he's going to kill them all. And he later even said that he had voices in his head that controlled him. But a lot of people think that that was just his way of trying to rewrite history and possibly get off on mental issues, as opposed to what the truth is, which was that he was a sadistic killer who loved to watch people be in pain. The methods that he used to kill people were so brutal that some of the victims had actually swallowed their own teeth during the attack. And one of the boyfriends of one of the victims, who was subsequently killed, threw himself against a fence multiple times trying to get away, but like a caged animal, Joseph DeAngelo just cornered him and killed him in a way that made him feel bigger than he was. Now, the idea of feeling bigger is something that's not just metaphorical in this case, because a lot of the victims specifically recall that this man had a very small endowment of the male kind, and that small endowment was something that he probably was very insecure about. And the victims didn't remember specifics about what he looked like. In fact, they didn't know, they couldn't even describe him to a sketch artist. When asked if he was circumcised, they didn't know. But one thing almost all the victims had in common was that they remembered that he was small.
Finally, on April 24, 2018, 42 years after his last known killing, DeAngelo was arrested at his home in Citrus Heights in Sacramento County.
Interestingly enough, DeAngelo was caught by modern science. A distant relative of his was in a dating site called Gem Match, and law enforcement put him on their list of suspects. Then they discovered that a distant relative of his was in this dating site. So they got the DNA match from the company, and then they tricked DeAngelo into giving them a cup with his DNA on it, and it wasn't an exact match, but it was so close that they knew they were on the track. So they followed him and then made an arrest sometime after that.
But the families of his victims and many more innocent people still live with the diabolical communication of this very evil person.